Soup season is here, so I decided to make a compilation of some of my favorite Mexican style soups to help keep you warm in the colder weather. Here we go. Today I'm going to make a small pot of Menudo Rojo with hominy. This is gonna be good. I'm going to be using 2 pounds of honeycomb beef tripe, and I'm going to clean it well with salt and fresh lime. And I will be scrubbing this. I'm going to soak it in water, and I'm just going to repeat the process 3 or 4 times until it is cleaned well. After cleaning it well, you'll want to cut into bite-sized pieces. In a pot with about 2.5 quarts of water, I'm going to add my prepped beef tripe. I'm also going to add 1 mashed clove of garlic, and I'm going to peel half of a small onion. That'll be going into the pot, along with 1 bay leaf. So I want to bring this to a rolling boil. I'm going to cover with a lid to expedite that process. Once it comes up to a rolling boil, I'm going to remove the lid and let it cook for about 1.5 hours. You'll want to start the cook time once it looks like this. You'll want it at a rolling boil and then start your 1.5 hour cook time. Earlier, I prepped my chili puree. Here I'll be using 3 guajillo chiles, and I'm going to remove the stems and seeds. I'm also going to use 1 chile ancho, some people call these pasilla, and 1 chile arbol, and I will remove the stem and seeds. Now if you want it spicy, leave the seeds in the chile arbol. It'll definitely add a kick. So I'm going to place them in a pot of water. I'm also going to add 2 cloves of garlic, and I'm going to cover with a lid and bring this up to a boil. Once it comes up to a boil, I'm going to shut off the heat, cover with the lid, and let it steep until the chilies are soft and pliable. I'm also going to be seasoning my menudo with cumin seeds and black peppercorns. Actually, this was a bag that came mixed, and I'm just going to grind this up. I'm going to use 1 teaspoon of this combination of spices, along with 1 teaspoon of Mexican oregano. Here in my blender cup, I'm going to add my steeped, softened, and soaked chilies, along with the garlic and the oregano and ground cumin. Here I'm adding 1 cup of beef broth. You can just add water or the soaking liquid if it's not bitter. Mine kind of tasted bitter. Now puree well. So my beef tripe has been boiling for about 1.5 hours. As you can see, a lot of the liquid evaporated and cooked out. So I removed the bay leaf and some of the onion that was left in the pot. And now I'm going to strain in my chili puree. Next, I'm going to add 2 more cups of low sodium beef broth. You could add water. This is a 30-ounce can of hominy that I rinsed and drained. Now an extra cup of water, give it a mix, and I'm going to bring this to another rolling boil. Now, the liquid that you're going to be boiling this in, you may need to add more water throughout the cooking process. It just depends how high and hard of a boil that you have. So I'm going to add salt to taste. You'll want to start with a half teaspoon of salt and just work your way up from there, tasting it, and it is to your preference. So I'm going to give this a stir and let this cook and boil until the beef tripe is tender. It should take another 45 minutes to 1 hour. And once it's done, it's time to serve. I'm going to garnish with freshly chopped onion, cilantro, a squeeze of fresh lime, and it's time to dig in. This is so good. Welcome back, everybody. Today I'm going to be making green pozole with chicken. This green pozole is so bright, fresh, comforting, and warming all at the same time. And here's how I do it. To get started, here I have 14 cups of water to my pot. I'm also going to be adding 3 pounds of chicken. I'm using skinless chicken legs and chicken tenders. That's what I had in my fridge. So to sort of give them the same cook time, I sliced my chicken legs down to the bone to sort of expedite the cooking for those. Now I'm going to add 1 large onion that I've halved. I will also be adding 4 cloves of garlic and 2 dried bay leaves into the pot. Next, I'm going to be adding 2 chicken flavored bouillon cubes. You could just add salt and skip the bouillon. I'm also going to add 1 teaspoon of salt and a half teaspoon of cracked black pepper and 1 tablespoon of Mexican oregano. I'm also going to be adding 1 pound of tomatillos. These are not green tomatoes, but if you can't find tomatillos, you can use green tomatoes. I'm using 1 pound. I'm going to remove the husk, and then I'm going to rinse them very well because they do come with debris. Once I've rinsed them, I'm going to add them right into my pot. Once my water comes up to a gentle boil, I'm going to continue cooking it for about 35 to 40 minutes or until my chicken is cooked and tender. Okay, so my chicken is done. It has been around 35 minutes on a boil, so I'm going to remove it from my pot. I'm going to shred it and set it aside until I need it again. Now I'm going to strain everything from the pot. I'm going to take it over to my sink. And anything left in the strainer, I'm going to puree this with some other ingredients. This is going to make that green puree that gives this soup the color. I also will discard my bay leaves. So now that I've strained everything, I am left with chicken broth that I will set to the side. So to my blender, I'm going to add a 1/3 cup of toasted pumpkin seeds. I basically toasted them in a dry pan until they got golden brown. Just like this. So now I'm going to add these right into my blender. This adds flavor and body to the broth. I'm also going to be adding roasted poblano peppers. Basically, I took 2 poblano peppers, charred the skins on an open flame. Then I placed them in a glass bowl, covered it with cling wrap, and let them sweat for about 15 minutes. Then I removed all the skin. I removed the stems and all the seeds from the peppers, and I'm left with this clean flesh that I will be adding to the blender. Now I'm going to add a bunch of fresh cilantro and fresh spinach. Basically, I just grabbed what I could with the palm of my hand. It's up to you. And if you don't like cilantro, leave it out and just add extra spinach. Now I'm going to add all of my contents from my strained broth. This is basically the tomatillos, the onion, garlic, and some of that oregano right into the blender. I will also be adding 1 cup of that chicken broth just to make it easier to puree into a smooth blended liquid. So now I'm just going to blend this into a smooth silky puree, and the color is so vibrant and green. It looks so pretty. Once my puree is done, I'm going to add it into a preheated pot to simmer. I'm using a 6-quart pot. Honestly, an 8-quart probably would have been better because it is pushing it a little bit, but you know, just to give you guys a heads up, 8-quart pot will work. So I'm going to simmer this, and to get some of that residual puree from the blender, I'm going to add a couple of ladlefuls of the broth, give it a swish, and add it right into my pot of puree. I'm going to combine this and let it simmer for about 3 to 5 minutes. And once it's done simmering, I'm going to add the rest of that reserved broth. Ultimately, I used 10 cups of chicken broth. So if you don't have time to boil or cook chicken, but you already have shredded chicken, then just use low sodium or store-bought chicken broth, 10 cups. That'll do the trick. So now I'm going to add 3 30-ounce cans of hominy that I've drained and rinsed right into my pot. I'm going to combine that and I'm going to let this cook and simmer for 20 to 30 minutes. So it has been around 25 minutes or so. I'm going to give this a mix. Now I'm going to add my shredded chicken right into the pot. And once I add my chicken, I'm going to let it continue to simmer for another 10 to 15 minutes, and then it's done. And I'm going to serve a bowl, and I'm going to show you how I serve it. By the way, I failed to mention this earlier, but if you want more spice in your pozole, add a couple of jalapeno peppers into the puree. That'll definitely do the trick. So now I'm going to add some freshly squeezed lime, some chopped onion, some shredded cabbage, and some cherry radishes. And I'm going to dig in. Today I'm going to make an easy variation of chicken pozole. I will be posting the link in the description below this video for my original chicken pozole, but today this one's going to be super easy to make and just as delicious. To start, I'm going to be boiling a 5.5 pound chicken. I have completely thawed this whole chicken and let it set on my counter for about 20 minutes to remove the chill. I'm going to fill an 8-quart pot with about 5 quarts of water, and I am going to bring it to a gentle rolling boil and allow it to cook for about an hour. Now, if you are working with a very cold chicken or semi-frozen, the cook time will definitely vary. So for a more even cook time, be sure that it's completely thawed. Now I'm going to add half of a small onion, 4 cloves of garlic, 2 large bay leaves, and 1 tablespoon of Mexican oregano. Once my pot of water comes up to a gentle boil, then I'm going to start the cook time. You'll want to make sure that it's actually simmering and boiling before you start your cook time. Throughout the cooking process, I will be skimming out any fat or foam that floats to the surface. Once my chicken is done, I'm going to remove it from my chicken broth, and I'm going to set it aside to be shredded. And I'm also going to be reserving that chicken broth that's left in the pot. To remove anything that I didn't skim out from the chicken broth, I'm going to strain it through a strainer with a mesh cloth in there, and it'll catch anything that I didn't skim out. And as you can see, there was some chicken left at the bottom of the pot. So basically, after straining your broth, you are left with a cleaner broth to be used, and this is 2.5 quarts of broth that it yielded. So now I'm just going to take 2 forks and shred all of the chicken. I'm probably going to remove most of the skin and just shred the chicken. You could also use your clean hands to shred the chicken. I actually like to let the chicken set for about 15 minutes before shredding it. So now that my chicken is shredded, I'm going to set it aside and go over the rest of the ingredients. I'm going to be using 2 cans or 2 30-ounce cans of white hominy. You could add more if you want more. This is all I had in my pantry. I'm also using 3 ounces of menudo mix. This is a menudo spice mix. I'll be using salt to taste and some chicken bouillon powder base. I'm going to start with 1 tablespoon of salt and 2 tablespoons of the chicken bouillon powder. Okay, so I'm working with a 12-quart pot now, and I'm adding 5.5 quarts of water to my 2.5 quarts of chicken broth. Now I'm going to turn on the stove, and I want to bring that up to a simmer. I'm also going to add my menudo spice mix. I'll also be adding my salt and chicken bouillon powder, and I want to bring that up to a simmer before I add anything else. And again, the ratios of salt and chicken bouillon powder is definitely up to you and to your taste. You'll want to taste this throughout before adding any more salt. And if you do not have the chicken bouillon powder, you don't have to use it. You could just add the salt. So once this is simmering, I'm going to give it a mix. And now I'm going to add my drained and rinsed hominy. I basically drained both cans and gave it a rinse. I'm going to give that a mix, and I'm going to let this gently simmer for 45 minutes. Okay, so it has been 45 minutes, and you want to make sure that the hominy is tender and cooked through. So at this point, I am going to add in all of my shredded chicken. Because the chicken is completely cooked, I'm basically going to combine it in the pot and just let it continue simmering for about 15 minutes just so that it can heat through. And at this point, your pozole will be done. I'm going to be garnishing my chicken pozole with thinly sliced cabbage, some thinly sliced purple onion, and fresh lime. You definitely can garnish with anything you like. I also like to do thinly sliced cherry radish when I have it. But I'm serving a bowl and I'm going to dig in. This chicken pozole is an easy variation to making pozole, and it's so delicious. Okay, so I have several ingredients that I need to use today, and what better way to use them than in a soup. Today I'm making a Mexican style meatball soup, also known as Caldo De Albondigas, and it's definitely a childhood favorite. So I've chopped all of my vegetables, 2 medium carrots, 1 large potato, 1 Mexican squash, and 1 jalapeno, which is optional, but I need to use it. And it does not make the soup spicy, by the way, unless it breaks open. I'm also going to be using 1 pound of lean ground beef. This is a 90-10 ratio of lean meat to fat. I'm also going to be adding a half cup of uncooked rice. And trust me, by the time everything is said and done, the rice will be cooked. To that, I will also add 2 cloves of minced garlic. By the way, some of these spices and seasonings in this recipe are definitely up to your preference, so you can change the ratios to your needs. I'm also adding a half teaspoon of granulated garlic powder and a half teaspoon of granulated onion powder. Now, the next ingredient is definitely optional, especially if you are the type of person that tastes soap when you eat cilantro. But I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of freshly chopped cilantro. And now I will add a half teaspoon of salt and a 1/4 teaspoon of pepper. Again, you can change that to your preference. Okay, so now I'm just going to combine this well, and once everything is combined, I am going to start forming them into meatballs. I typically get around a dozen to maybe 14 meatballs, but it's up to you how big or small you want them. So my meatballs are all rolled out, so I'm actually going to cover them and set them on the counter for around 10 minutes because my ground beef is really cold and I kind of want to take the chill off. Here I have a pot preheating with 2 tablespoons of oil in it, so I'm going to start by sauteing a half cup of chopped onion. I'm going to add my chopped potato and carrots. I want to give those a head start as well because those will take the longest to cook. And then I'm just going to continue sauteing for another minute. And then once those saute, I'm going to add the zucchini. I actually like to use crushed tomato in a lot of my recipes because I just like buying them in these little square containers. But if you have a small can of tomato sauce, that works as well. Once I've mixed in the crushed tomato with everything, I'm going to add some Knorr chicken flavored bouillon base powder. Now, you can skip this and ultimately use your own chicken stock or broth, but this is what I like to use. And I'm going to start with a tablespoon, but ultimately I'm using 2.5 tablespoons of this bouillon base powder. Add 2.5 quarts of water. I'm going to add pepper to taste. Then I'll want to bring this up to a simmer. Now that my soup is boiling, I'm going to start adding the meatballs. Once all of my meatballs are added, I am going to cover my soup with a lid, and I'm going to lower the temperature, maybe somewhere between medium low to low, and I'm going to cook it for around 25 to 30 minutes or until all of the vegetables are tender, the meat is cooked, and so is the rice. Once everything is cooked, you can also taste the broth. If it needs extra seasoning or salt, you can add it at this point and maybe allow another extra 5 minutes of cook time. Then this is ready to serve. Next up is a recipe for Caldo Xochitl. This is so flavorful, delicious, and simple to make. Okay, so to get started, I'm going to be using around 3.5 quarts of water. And to that, I'm going to be adding some green onion. I'm going to add that right to the pot. I'm going to add 1 stick of celery, 1 small carrot. I'm going to add 1 dried bay leaf and several cloves of fresh garlic. I'm also going to add 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And I'm going to also add 2 pounds of chicken breast. I removed the skin, but this is bone in. Bring it up to a gentle boil. And if any foam collects at the surface, I'm just going to scoop that out. And I'm going to continue cooking the chicken breast for about 25 minutes or so until it's done. And you want to make sure it's not at a hard boil. Just keep it at a gentle simmering boil to cook it. It'll definitely yield a more tender chicken breast. So now that my chicken breast is cooked, I'm going to remove it from the broth and I'm going to set it aside just to let it rest before I shred or chop it. But once I remove it from the broth, I'm going to let the broth continue to simmer with the vegetables and the bay leaf in it. I'm going to let it continue simmering for about another 15 minutes. I just want the broth to be flavorful. Now the broth in this soup is supposed to be light, but it should be flavorful, so you can definitely add any aromatics, seasonings, and spices that you would like to the broth. Once my chicken breast has rested for about 10 to 15 minutes, I'm going to remove the bone and just take the chicken off of the bone. And you can chop it into chunks, you can shred it with your hands, it's definitely up to you. And don't discard the carrot. I will use the carrot, but my broth is just on a low simmer. So now I'm going to work on the rest of the ingredients. So first, I'm going to saute 1 Mexican squash that I've cut into cubes. And I'm also going to be using fresh tomato. I'm not going to saute the tomato, I just diced it. I removed the seeds and diced it. But first, let me saute this zucchini just to give it a head start. You could actually also put these ingredients right into your broth. But I'm going to go the extra mile and show you a different way to serve this, and it looks really nice when you're just trying to make it look visually appealing, but honestly, put it all together in the broth and it works. Okay, so I added a little bit of salt. I added a ladleful of the broth just to expedite the zucchini to cook it a little bit. Once my zucchini is done, I'm going to set it aside, and I'm also using a 15-ounce can of chickpeas or garbanzo beans, and you'll want to make sure you remove the skin or the husk from the garbanzo bean if it's still there. For the most part, canned chickpeas are pretty clean, so those are already cooked. I am now ready to put a bowl of this Caldo Xochitl together. So my broth has been gently simmering, so here's my bowl. Rice in the center, some of the chicken, I diced the carrot, the chickpeas, the cooked zucchini, and fresh tomato. So now you'll want to ladle that delicious chicken broth right on top. And this is perfect with fresh avocado, cilantro, some diced onion. And if you like spice, you can definitely add your fresh jalapeno or sliced serrano peppers. It's up to you. Now, I also want to show you, if you don't want to serve it this way, you can add it right into the broth. I'm going to add my tomato, zucchini, and chickpeas. And you could also add some of that fresh diced onion, or you can just add the chicken and carrot and top it with the fresh ingredients as you serve. It's all up to you, and it's still just as delicious. Let's make Sopa de Siete Mares, or you might know it as Sopa de Marisco. So to start, here I have a 1/2 pound of bay scallops, and I'm going to end up using a full pound of codfish. Use the fish of your choice. Here I have a 1/2 pound of Dungeness crab legs, and I'm also going to be using a 1/2 pound of seafood mix. I picked this up from my local seafood market. And I'm also going to be using a 1/2 pound of extra jumbo shrimp. And I did remove the shells and I reserved it because I'm going to use the shrimp shells to make a broth. Okay, so on to the broth. There are so many ways to make a simple broth, but this is how I like to do it. So here I have 4.5 quarts of water, and to that I'm going to add a variety of ingredients. I reserved all of the shells from the shrimp that I deveined and peeled. Here I have 1 green onion that it has the bulb at the bottom, 1 stick of celery, 1 medium stick of carrot. I have a bunch of cilantro and about 7 cloves of fresh garlic that I just left the skin on and I just gave it a mash. It's all going into my water, and I'm also going to be using 2 tablespoons of chicken bouillon powder base. Now, you don't have to use that. You could just use salt at some point, or you don't have to season the broth right now and just salt your soup later. So I'm going to turn my heat on, and I'm going to bring my pot of water and ingredients to a rolling boil. And once it starts to boil, I'm going to put it on a medium heat, cover it with a lid, and let it gently simmer for about 30 to 45 minutes. Then I'm going to strain the broth to remove all of the shrimp shells and ingredients. And you are left with a very flavorful broth to start your soup. And I am ultimately going to use around 3 quarts of this broth in the soup. So there are various ways that I make this soup. Sometimes I like to add potatoes, corn, carrot, and zucchini to make it a bit heartier. So at this point, you'd probably want to add your potatoes and carrots. Let it simmer and cook for about 15 minutes, then add zucchini and fresh ears of corn. Let it continue cooking for 5 minutes. Then you're going to add the rest of your seafood and other ingredients. But I'm not adding those today. So here to my broth, I am going to just add a half cup or 4 ounces of tomato puree. I'm also going to add 1 tablespoon of Louisiana hot sauce. You can use something like Tabasco sauce, Valentina sauce, Cholula, the hot sauce of your choice. I like Louisiana hot sauce. So I'm going to give that a mix. And here at this point, you'll want to taste it for things like salt, or if you want to use more of that chicken powder base, add a little bit more. And there is also a seafood or shrimp bouillon powder base. You can definitely use that, but I like to use the chicken. So now I'm going to just add salt to taste. I'm using a sea salt with this. I'm going to give it a mix, and I'm going to bring this up to a simmer. Once your broth is simmering, you're going to want to start adding your raw seafood first. The only thing that I have raw is basically my shrimp, scallops, and fish. So I'm going to put those in first. Then I have the seafood mix. The crab legs were already cooked. I'll add that in. So this is all going to go quick. Just in the matter of seconds, that shrimp already looks like it's cooked. So you don't want to boil your seafood for a long time. It's literally going to take less than 5 minutes if your broth has already simmered and it's up to a good hot temperature. So I'm going to continue adding all of my seafood. I'm going to give it a mix. And if it needs a little more salt or something like maybe some Louisiana hot sauce, I might add a dash to it. And then it's ready to serve. So after serving my husband's bowl, I'm just going to add some garnishes and toppings. We like to add chopped scallions, fresh cilantro, a squeeze of lime, some fresh avocado, and sometimes I like to add extra hot sauce to this, and it's perfect. And then my husband, what he'll do is add a scoop of steamed rice, and this is a light, refreshing, warm, and possibly hearty soup all in one. It's so delicious, you guys, especially when it's cold and rainy outside. So I hope you give this recipe a try. I hope you like it, and thanks for watching.